Nobody in the United States government knows how many people are missing on American public land. Not approximately, not to the nearest 1,000. There is no number, because there is no place to write it down. The National Park Service can give you a partial answer about the parks. Ask about the national forests, the Bureau of Land Management ground, and the wilderness areas, and there is nothing to give. That silence covers 640 million acres. The best estimate anyone has produced puts it at 1,600 people minimum. The people who produced it say in the same breath that the real figure is likely much higher. Here is what that emptiness costs. There is an exit ramp in northern Nevada. Number 205, Pumpernickel Valley, off Interstate 80 east of Winnemucca. Dirt tracks run off it into the sagebrush and stop. Nobody has any reason to go there. In March of 2006, a white pickup was found sitting at that ramp, empty. It belonged to a 62-year-old woman from Reno named Judith Casita. She has never been found. 5 years later, in April of 2011, a green Subaru was found in the same field, at the same ramp, operable, with fuel in the tank and every one of the owner's belongings still inside it. It belonged to an 86-year-old World War II veteran from Reno named Patrick Carnes. He was traveling with a 100-pound dog. Neither the man nor the dog has ever been found. Two people from the same city, at the same ramp in the middle of an empty desert, 5 years apart. And nobody in law enforcement connected those two cases. Not because anybody was careless, because the two files sat in two different county offices 200 miles apart, and there is no field in any national database that records where on federal land a person disappeared, so there was nothing that could ever have put them on the same screen. Somebody did eventually notice. It was a private citizen looking at a map. Nobody counts. That is not an accusation. It is a finding, and it belongs to the United States Senate rather than to me. In September of 2024, the Senate passed a bill built on one sentence, and the language in the senator's own material is blunt. There is no functional system to report people who have gone missing on public lands. The Senate passed it unanimously. It did not become law. They introduced it again. In September of 2025, the Senate passed it a second time and sent it to the House of Representatives, where it is still sitting. The entire bill is 6 pages long. All it does is add one field to a form. This is Echo 7. Everybody makes videos about the national parks. Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, the Smokies. Parks are the small part, and they are the only piece of federal land with an investigative branch and a published list of the missing. Tonight is the other part. 14 files, all of them on national forest, wilderness, or Bureau of Land Management ground. You will notice, somewhere in the middle, that the amount I can tell you starts to fall away. Names get shorter, details stop. That is not me running out of material. That is the edge of what this country knows about its own citizens. Where the documents stop, I stop. Whatever you build in the gap is yours. Judith Casita left her house in Reno on the 14th of February, 2006. She was 62, gray hair, hazel eyes, 5'6". Her nickname was Judy. She had a scar running from her neck down to her abdomen. She was driving a white 1991 Mazda pickup. She left a note at home. In it, she said she was depressed about her life and about the state of her marriage. That note decides everything that comes after it, because it decides how the case gets filed, and how a case gets filed decides who looks for you. A woman leaves a note about her marriage and drives away. Every agency in the country processes that in the same way. It becomes an adult who chose to leave. It becomes low priority. It becomes a report that sits in a drawer in the county she left from. Her truck was not found for 19 days. On the 5th of March, it turned up abandoned at the 205 exit ramp, Pumpernickel Valley, off Interstate 80 near Winnemucca. The geography does not fit the story the note tells. Reno is where she left from. Pumpernickel Valley is roughly 200 miles northeast of Reno, deep into the empty part of northern Nevada, on the stretch of Interstate 80 that truckers call the Big Lonely. The name is not affectionate. From Winnemucca to Elko is 125 miles with almost nothing between them. At night, there are no lights off the highway in any direction. The exits out there exist for ranchers and for mines, and half of them lead to a cattle guard and a dirt track that ends at a gate. Exit 205 is one of those. There is no town on it, no service, no attraction. The freeway touches the desert for a moment and then leaves again. A woman driving away from her life drives to a place, a relative, a motel, a city. There has been no activity on her bank account since the day she disappeared. Not one transaction in 20 years. The Washoe County Sheriff's Office searched the area around the truck and found nothing. Notice which office that was. Washoe County contains Reno. The truck was in Humboldt County, 200 miles away. The searching agency drove out of its own jurisdiction to look at a piece of desert it does not patrol, because the case belonged to it and the ground did not. None of that is a criticism of anybody. It is the shape of the problem. The county that owned the case did not own the ground. The county that owned the ground did not own the case. Both of them did the correct thing, and neither of them was in a position to see the whole of it. Essentially, that is the entire file. A note. A truck at a ramp in the desert. 19 days of nobody knowing where the truck was. 20 years of silence in the bank records. Her case was classified as endangered missing. She would be in her early 80s now. Her family lived in Oregon. To reach them from Reno, you go north on 395, or west and then north. Interstate 80 East takes you the other way entirely, across the top of Nevada toward Utah, and she would have passed every exit that leads somewhere for 200 miles before reaching the one that leads nowhere, unless she was not the one driving by then. 19 days is also long enough for a truck to be moved. There is a version of this that is straightforward and painful and requires no mystery at all. A woman in distress drives into the desert. That is a whole and sufficient explanation, and it deserves to stand. One question survives it. The searches around that ramp found nothing. Not a shoe, not a coat, not remains, not a scrap. And Pumpernickel Valley is not thick forest. It is open ground, sagebrush, low hills, mine workings, sightlines that run for miles. And in 19 days, nobody noticed a truck sitting at an exit ramp on an interstate that carries thousands of vehicles a day. Or somebody noticed and did not think it was worth a phone call, which is the same thing. That last part will come back. One more thing about the file, and it is the thing that keeps it from settling. Nobody has ever established when that Mazda arrived at exit 205. Only when somebody finally looked at it. Between the day she left Reno and the day the truck was noticed, there are 19 days, and every one of them is empty. 5 years later, on the 12th of April 2011, an 86-year-old man named Patrick Carnes left Toledo, Ohio, driving west. Everybody called him Pat. He was a World War II veteran who served in the Solomon Islands. He had been a truck driver, which matters, because it means the interstate was not a strange environment to him. He was in excellent health for his age. His family described him as sharp as a tack. He had been in Ohio visiting relatives and looking at retirement homes because he was planning to move back to the state where his family was. He was driving a green Subaru Forester, and with him was an 8-year-old brown Akita mix named Lucky. The dog weighed somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds. Pat rarely went anywhere without him. He had no cell phone. On the night of the 13th of April, near the town of Wells, Nevada, a Nevada Highway Patrol trooper was working a traffic stop on a tractor-trailer at the side of Interstate 80. Pat drove past without moving over into the far lane. The trooper broke off the stop he was on and pulled him over. It was a warning, a minor moving violation. 9 in the evening. During that conversation, Pat told the trooper something. He said he was following a truck driver and that the trucker was headed to Elko. That is the last recorded thing Patrick Carnes said to anyone. The identity of that truck driver has never been determined. An 86-year-old man with no cell phone, alone on a night highway across the emptiest part of Nevada, tells a police officer that he is following a truck. Not that a truck is near him, that he is following one, and that he knows where it is going. There had been contact. You do not learn a stranger's destination from behind him at 70 miles an hour. Somewhere on the road that night, or before it, Patrick Carnes and a truck driver had spoken. An 86-year-old man who had driven trucks for a living, alone on the Big Lonely at 9 at night, decides to run behind somebody. That is a sensible thing to do, and it is also the oldest habit there is on a night highway. You find a set of taillights, and you keep them. The trooper who wrote that warning had a conversation with the last person known to have seen Patrick Carnes alive, and did not know it, and had no reason to write down anything about a truck. A few minutes after the stop, Pat bought gas in Wells. That is the last confirmed sighting of him alive. At just before 6 the next morning, a mine employee driving to work noticed a car parked in an unusual place off the interstate at the Pumpernickel Valley off-ramp. Exit 205. Wells is about 350 miles east of Reno. Pumpernickel Valley is roughly 150 miles further west along the same freeway. So the car moved. He kept driving through the night, and then the car stopped at a ramp with nothing on it. Here is what was in it and around it. The Subaru had gas in the tank. It was in operable condition. It was high-centered and stuck in sagebrush, and it was facing the wrong direction. All of his personal belongings were inside, including his checkbook. There were no signs of a struggle. And there was a single set of footprints leading away from the scene. One set. Pat is gone. Lucky is gone. Between 80 and 100 pounds of dog and one set of prints. A dog that size leaves marks in desert soil. It leaves them beside a person's, ahead of a person's, doubling back across a person's, because that is how dogs walk with people. Unless the dog was carried, or the dog was not walking, or the ground took prints from one set of feet and not another, or the single set was not his. The record says one set leading away from the scene. It does not say whose. It does not say which direction. It does not say how far they were followed before they stopped being followable. Somewhere in a Humboldt County file there is a note about where those prints went. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Office put 600 to 700 man-hours into the search. Canines, all-terrain vehicles, jeeps, ground teams, multiple flights over the area. Later that summer, they went back and pushed camera equipment down numerous mine shafts in the general area where the vehicle was found. Because that country is full of old workings, and a mine shaft is the one place a ground search can't see into. Nothing came up. No Pat, no dog, no clothing, no remains, not a hat. He was wearing a Toledo Mud Hens baseball cap the last time anyone saw him. There is one more thing about the ground out there that the search reports keep circling without saying directly. The Pumpernickel Valley area sits in the middle of Nevada's mining country, which means the desert around that exit is not smooth. It is punctured, shafts, adits, prospect holes, glory holes, some of them a century and a half old, most of them uncovered, almost none of them mapped by anybody living. 100 feet off a dirt track, there can be a hole that goes down 200 feet, with sagebrush growing over the collar of it. It is why they brought cameras. That sheriff's department has 15 officers for roughly 10,000 square miles. 10,000 square miles is larger than the state of New Hampshire. Set that beside what the search actually involved. Cameras lowered into mine shafts. That is not a routine step. Nobody sends a camera down a hole unless they have run out of surfaces to look at. And northern Nevada is full of holes, because the whole state was dug over twice, once for silver and once for gold. And the workings from both are unmapped and unfenced and open. They looked into numerous shafts. Numerous is the word in the record. It does not say how many. It does not say what they found in them. It says nothing came up. Now put the two files side by side, because for a while nobody did. Judith Casita, February 2006, truck at exit 205, never found. Patrick Carnes, April 2011, car at exit 205, never found. Two different counties investigated them. Casita is a Washoe County case because she disappeared from Reno. Carnes is a Humboldt County case because that is where the car was found. Both cases are open. Both are active. They are in two different filing systems in two different offices 200 miles apart. But the location they share is not in either file as a searchable fact because there is no field for it. What would that have taken? Not an investigation, not a task force. One line in one database, saying this person was last connected to this piece of federal land at these coordinates. Then, in April of 2011, a deputy in Winnemucca types a location into a form, and the system tells him it has seen that spot before. It did not happen, because no such system exists. It got noticed anyway, eventually, by people looking at maps on their own time. Investigators connected the Carnes case to at least 3 other missing persons in the vicinity. There is an FBI initiative on highway serial killings that has produced a map of where people have gone missing and where bodies have been found along the interstates, and northern Nevada shows up on it. Pat's son, Ken, described the search for his father as being stuck in neutral. Not going forward, not going backward. The family put flyers up at truck stops and fast food places along the Big Lonely themselves. The part that will not settle is not the theory about who else was out there. It is the dog. Lucky was a large animal in good condition, 8 years old, attached to a man who rarely went anywhere without him. Dogs on that stretch of ground get found. They walk to a road, because a road is the easiest surface, and roads in Nevada are where everything eventually ends up. 600 to 700 hours of searching, canines, aircraft, and no dog. Whatever took Patrick Carnes off that ramp took a 100-pound animal with him and left one set of footprints. So the questions stay open. Why is the car facing the wrong direction? Why is it high-centered in sagebrush off a ramp when it had gas and it ran? Why does a man who spent his working life driving trucks get his own vehicle stuck in a place a truck driver would never put it? Why is the checkbook still on the seat? Why did he tell a state trooper about a stranger's destination? Why does the exit he stopped at happen to be the exit where a woman's truck was found empty 5 years earlier? And where is the dog? Somewhere in a Humboldt County file there is an answer to at least one of those, because somebody stood in that sagebrush at 6 in the morning and wrote down what they saw. It has never been made public. The next man worked for the agency that owns the ground he disappeared on. David Barclay Miller was 22 years old. He was born in July of 1975 in Maryland, one of 3 children. His brother and his sister both had a rare bone disease, which David never developed, and his sister died in 1984 when he was 9. The people who knew him described him the same way over and over. Sensitive, energetic, a person with a deep appreciation for being alive. One of his coaches said he was never going to do anything at second speed. An athletic director who had coached for 20 years said he had never seen a kid who would give everything he had the way David did, and that it was almost as though David knew how precious life was. As a teenager, he kayaked the coast of Maine and slept out alone on a remote island. He backpacked through New England and the Pacific Northwest. He swam and he played rugby. Everything anyone says about him is about capability and about appetite for the outdoors. That is the profile of a person who is hard to lose. In April of 1998, he started work for the United States Forest Service as a wilderness ranger in Arizona's Coconino National Forest. A wilderness ranger is the person who walks the backcountry for a living. Trail conditions, campsites, permits, the state of the ground. If anybody knew that country, it was going to be him, and he had 1 month of it under his belt. On the 19th of May, 1998, his co-workers saw him at the Beaver Creek Ranger Station. He had 3 days off coming. That evening, he left a note at the station. It said he was going hiking in the Red Rock and Secret Mountain Wilderness area. He never came back. His Subaru was found days later, abandoned at a trailhead. He was 5'11", 160 pounds, in a t-shirt, shorts, and black hiking boots, carrying a forest green backpack. Sandy blonde hair, blue-gray eyes, glasses or contacts. That is the file. A note at a ranger station, a car at a trailhead, and a young man in shorts walking into Red Rock country. Nothing else has ever been found. Not the pack, not a boot, not a bone. 28 years. The pack is the thing. A forest green Gregory backpack is a manufactured object with straight edges and a synthetic color, and synthetic color does not occur in Red Rock country. That is the single most findable thing a person can leave in that landscape. Aerial searchers look for exactly that. A green rectangle in a world of sandstone and juniper. 28 years of hikers, canyoneers, hunters, Forest Service crews, and photographers have walked that wilderness since. It is not remote in any absolute sense. Sedona is right there. The trailheads are signed. Nothing. There's a detail about that note that gets described in different ways depending on who is writing about it. Some accounts call it enigmatic. What it plainly did was tell his employer where he was going, which is exactly what a Forest Service employee is trained to do, and exactly what saved 100 other people's lives that decade. It bought him nothing. Secret mountain wilderness is slick rock and canyon, sandstone benches, drop-offs that appear without warning, and drainages that run in directions that make no sense from above. It is stunning country, and it is not forgiving country, and it is also not enormous. This is not the Brooks Range. It is a wilderness area outside Sedona with trailheads and day hikers. He had a job that consisted of walking it. So the questions stand. What does a wilderness ranger with a month in the job do differently from a tourist? He goes where the tourists do not, because that is the job. Which means the note at the ranger station named an area, and the actual route inside that area was his own, and nobody else on Earth knew it. Why does an experienced backcountry traveler in Arizona in May go out in shorts and a t-shirt? Because in May, at that elevation, in the middle of the day, that is what you wear. And because in May, at that elevation, at 3 in the morning, it is not. Was he alone? Did he meet anyone? Did anyone see the Subaru at that trailhead in the days before it was reported? And what exactly did the note say? Because the accounts describe it as enigmatic and none of them quote it. 14 years later, in July of 2012, a 27-year-old man named Sean Rentz disappeared in the same forest, Coconino National Forest. Nearly 2 million acres, running from Red Rock Desert up through the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forest in the world to the top of the highest mountain in Arizona. It is close to all anyone can tell you about Sean Rentz, because it is close to all there is. He exists on a list somebody built by hand. An age, a year, a forest, a coordinate. That is the whole point of this episode. A man in his 20s disappeared inside one of the most heavily used national forests in the American Southwest, and everything the public can learn about it fits on one line of a website maintained by people doing it for free. If Sean Rentz had disappeared in a national park a mile north, there would be an investigative services branch case number. There would be a cold case page with a photograph on it. There would be a phone number for tips. He disappeared in a national forest instead. The line between those two things on a map is invisible. You cross it on foot without noticing. Coconino National Forest wraps around parts of the Grand Canyon country and touches monument boundaries in half a dozen places, and a person walking a drainage has no idea which agency's problem he becomes if he stops walking. But the line decides everything about what happens next. Which uniform runs the search? Which office keeps the file? Whether there is a case number a stranger can look up in 20 years. Whether there is a photograph on a website. 2 men, the same 2 million acres, 14 years apart. One of them worked there. Nothing in any federal system connects them, because there is nothing in any federal system that records either of them as having disappeared on federal land at all. Justin Lee Richardson was 13 years old. On the 29th of June, 2001, he went into the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona, a few miles south of Grand Canyon National Park, and about 5 miles west of a place called Moki Lodge, which has since been torn down. He was with 3 friends. They were between 18 and 21. Authorities believe the group had gone into the forest to use drugs, possibly methamphetamine, and that Justin had been partying and was under the influence. A 13-year-old boy, 3 men between 18 and 21, in a national forest, on a June morning. The 4 of them got separated. 2 got lost. Justin and one of the others walked out to the town of Tusayan and asked another friend to help look for the missing pair. While that was happening, the 2 lost men were located by Grand Canyon Railway employees south of Tusayan. Justin did not know that. He and one friend went back into the Kaibab National Forest to a spot about 5 miles from Tusayan and 15 miles from where their friends had already been found. And then Justin Richardson became the one who was missing. His father reported him missing on the 1st of July. Search parties covered 64 miles of forest on horseback and by helicopter. No body, no remains, no trace. He was last seen wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey. He did not have a cell phone. He did have a GPS unit. This is where the record starts arguing with itself. The Charlie Project and the volunteer databases give the 29th of June as the day he was last seen in the Kaibab National Forest. Coconino County's own published cold case list says something different. It says Justin Richardson, a 13-year-old, was last seen walking away from friends at Grand Canyon on the 2nd of July. Different date, different place, different action. One says he was last seen on the 29th of June in a national forest. The other says he was last seen on the 2nd of July at the Grand Canyon, walking away from friends. Those are not the same event. Between them lie 3 days, 15 miles, and a jurisdictional line. And the jurisdictional line is the entire difference between a Forest Service problem and a National Park Service problem. In 2018, Coconino County Sheriff's officials told a local paper what they actually think happened. They said they believe he was the victim of a homicide. So the theories that have been publicly floated are these: that his body is still in the Kaibab National Forest, most likely buried, or that he relocated to be with a girlfriend and has never contacted anyone since. He was 13, a Chicago Bulls jersey, no phone, a GPS unit, 3 men in their late teens and 20s, a national forest in June. He was 13. He had run away once before, and that single fact shapes how a case gets handled from the first hour. A prior runaway is a category. A category is a priority. A priority is how many people walk the ground in the first 48 hours. 64 miles of horseback and a helicopter for a child in a forest of 1.5 million acres. But the questions in this one are not gentle. Why was a 13-year-old boy in a forest at dawn with 3 men in their late teens and 20s? Who were the 2 who got lost, and who found them, and what did they say when they were found? What happened during the hours when Justin and one friend were back in that forest alone, 15 miles from where the others had already turned up safe? Who was the last adult with him? Why did his father have to be the one to report it 2 days later? And why do the sheriff's own investigators, 17 years afterward, say the word homicide about a case that every database still lists as a lost boy in the woods? He had a GPS unit with him. It has never been recovered either. If you want a single image for what this whole episode is about, it is this one. The public record can't agree on what day a 13-year-old boy was last seen, or which piece of federal land he was standing on when it happened. Before the next file, the numbers. They are the reason all of this is happening, and they come from the Senate rather than from me. According to the material accompanying the bill, more than 600,000 people go missing in the United States every year. Most are resolved. Tens of thousands remain missing. There are approximately 640 million acres of federal land, national parks, national forests, and Bureau of Land Management ground. Estimates suggest that at least 1,600 people have gone missing on public lands, though the number is likely much higher because isolated or rugged terrain makes it especially difficult to find or identify people who go missing there. Then comes the sentence the entire bill exists to fix. Despite this, there is no functional system to report people who have gone missing on public lands. Senator Tillis, who introduced it, put it this way: every year people go missing on public lands without being recorded in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. He called it an oversight that impedes law enforcement from keeping track of those who go missing for the purpose of search and rescue. 1,600 people is the floor, not the estimate. Nobody making that estimate believes it. Now, Barbara Bullock, who disappeared in the length of a glance in front of a witness. She was 55, and she lived in the Bitterroot Valley in Montana with her husband Carl, whom she had met in New Jersey while he was still in the Air Force. On the morning of Wednesday the 18th of July, 2007, she volunteered to take a family friend on a hike. The friend was a guest, a man named Jim, connected to the family through her husband's cousin. He was visiting from out of state. She took him to the Bear Creek Overlook Trail in the Bitterroot National Forest above the town of Victor. It was her favorite trail. She had hiked it countless times, alone and with other people. It is about 2.5 miles up to a viewpoint. At some point on that hike, her companion later told authorities he looked away briefly. When he looked back, Barbara was not there. No sound, no cry, no slide of rock, nothing. He came out of the forest hours later with that account, and it is the only account there is. Search dogs, volunteers, and law enforcement covered that country. Not a single sign of Barbara Bollick has ever been found. Jim Harmon, a former news director at NBC Montana who has followed the case for years, described the problem exactly. They were only a short distance apart. In a few seconds he looks back and she is not there. How in the world did that happen? How could she not just have been a short distance down the hill? And there is a physical detail in this file that almost nobody outside Montana knows. That trail is built on loose shale. Loose shale is the noisiest surface a person can move across. You can't walk on it quietly. You can't leave it quietly. A fall on it makes noise, a scramble on it makes noise, and a person dragged across it makes an enormous amount of noise. Somebody standing a short distance away should have heard something. Nobody heard anything. And there is a second thing about shale that matters as much. It holds a body. A person who goes off a shale slope does not vanish into it. They come to rest on it or in the trees below it, in the open, visible from above, because shale slopes are bare by definition. That is what a shale slope is. Nothing grows on moving rock. The Overlook Trail is 2.5 miles. The country below it is steep and it is searchable. Dogs went through there. Volunteers went through there. Aircraft went over it. A woman who weighed 115 pounds did not slide out of that landscape without leaving a mark on it. Here is what the public record holds, undecorated. The Ravalli County Sheriff's Office has for years been actively seeking information about 2 young men who were seen in that area on that day. They have never been identified. Barbara knew the trail. Her companion did not. So the questions here are short, and every one of them has been sitting open for 18 years. How long is briefly? 10 seconds is a different case from 4 minutes, and no account has ever pinned it down. How far apart is a short distance? Where exactly on that trail did it happen, and has that ever been publicly fixed to a point? Why did it take hours for the account to reach anybody? What were 2 unidentified young men doing in that area on that Wednesday, and why can nobody find them? And the one nobody says out loud, there is exactly one person who knows what happened in those seconds, and everything anybody knows about that day comes from him. 18 years on, that is where it sits. A woman who knew the ground vanished from it in the time it takes a man to turn his head, on a surface that can't be crossed silently, with one witness, in a national forest. She would be in her 70s now. Bear Creek Overlook is still there. It is still a popular hike. People drive up the Bitterroot to do it on summer Wednesdays, exactly like the one she chose, and most of them have no idea that anything happened on it. Dustin Self drove 1,500 miles to test himself against the wilderness, and the wilderness was not the thing that got confusing. He was 19, from Piedmont, Oklahoma, a suburb of Oklahoma City. In the middle of March of 2013, he left his family home and drove west. He had recently watched a film about a young man who gave up everything he owned to live in the Alaskan bush and died there. He told his parents he wanted to see if he could live in the wild. He also planned to look into 2 churches in Oregon that practice a South American religion in which a hallucinogenic tea is used as a sacrament. One is in Ashland and one is in Portland. His parents tried to stop him. He went anyway. He bought a pile of backpacking gear on the way. On the 15th of March, he was at the Fields Station in Fields, Oregon, when it opened. Fields is an outpost, 22 miles north of Nevada, 112 miles south of Burns. The woman who put gas in his truck that morning said nothing about him stood out. He got fuel, and that was it. He mentioned he was heading for Lakeview, more than 100 miles to the west. A storekeeper in Fields also reported seeing him sleeping in his truck and low on fuel, and said Self told him he had gotten lost following his GPS and asked for directions to Lakeview. Lakeview is west. The next day, the 16th of March, he sent a text message to his ex-girlfriend. He wrote that he was lost. He wrote that he had seen plants coming out of the ground and running around. He also called his father, and the sheriff later said there was evidence he was hallucinating during that call as well. His father told investigators the young man had used drugs in the past and had been using medication for attention deficit disorder to stay awake on the drive out from Oklahoma. He told his family he thought he was near Denio, Nevada. He was not. That text is the last known contact Dustin's self had with anyone. Nothing surfaced for a month. Then, in mid-April, a ranch foreman found his black 1999 Toyota Tacoma teetering on an embankment along a seldom-traveled road winding through Stonehouse Canyon on Steens Mountain in the far southeast corner of Oregon. The truck was about 2.5 miles west of the field's Denio Road and roughly 35 miles north of the area that had first been searched. Steens Mountain is a fault block, a single enormous ridge, 30 miles long, that rises out of the desert and catches every piece of weather that comes across the Great Basin. Here is what the Harney County deputies found in the truck: snack food, energy drinks, his computer, a GPS device. All of it, the sheriff believed, deliberately left behind. And here is what was not in the truck: his backpack and his kit. So the picture is a 19-year-old with no vehicle, no laptop, no navigation, and no phone signal on a mountain in March, with a pack, having last told 2 people he was hallucinating and lost. The search that followed was fought against the mountain. 15 to 20-foot snowdrifts, temperatures below zero, high winds that grounded aircraft for days at a time. "Steens catches everything," the sheriff said, "because it is one long fault and the weather comes across the Great Basin and hits it." A rancher with a helicopter got one break in the weather and flew the mountainside and 5 nearby cabins used by hunters and cowboys. She saw nothing. His lime green tent was not visible anywhere. Searchers on ATVs saw no tracks at all. Sheriff Dave Glarup, who ran it, said publicly that he thought Self was either dead or had walked off Steens Mountain and hitched a ride somewhere after the truck got stuck. Sightings started being reported in towns hundreds of miles away, in Oregon and in Washington. None were confirmed. In October of 2014, a hunter found skeletal remains on the north end of Steens Mountain, about 7 miles from where the truck and the backpack had been found. A driver's license, a credit card, a keychain his family recognized, articles of clothing. The sheriff said there were no signs of foul play and that the young man probably died of exposure. It closes the question of where, and it touches nothing else. Because the questions in this file were never about the mountain. Why does a truck heading west to Lakeview end up 35 miles north on a track through Stonehouse Canyon? Why does the sheriff conclude that the food, the drinks, the computer, and the GPS were deliberately left behind rather than simply abandoned with the vehicle? What does a 19-year-old take with him when he takes a pack and leaves navigation? And what was he actually seeing out there, the day he wrote that the plants were coming out of the ground and running around? Because there is a version of this that is simple. A 19-year-old on a mountain in March, disoriented, possibly from sleep deprivation and possibly from something else, gets a 2-wheel drive truck stuck on a track that had no business carrying it, and walks. 7 miles is a long way in that country and a short way for a young man who wants to keep going. Exposure does the rest. The sheriff said as much, and the sheriff was standing there. It accounts for the ending. It does not account for the middle. He was gassing up in Fields on the 15th, telling people he was heading 100 miles west. On the 16th, he was hallucinating and lost, and thought he was in a different state. In April, the truck turns up 35 miles north of anywhere anyone had looked, on a canyon track, teetering on an embankment. What happened between the gas pump and the canyon? And why did the sheriff conclude that the food and the drinks and the laptop and the navigation had been left behind on purpose? Deliberately is the word. That is somebody looking at the inside of a vehicle and reading intent in it. What does a 19-year-old take with him when he decides to leave the machine that tells him where he is? He was on Bureau of Land Management ground. Steens Mountain is a congressionally designated cooperative management area, and it is federal land, and there is no field in any national database that says so. He is not counted in any total of people who have gone missing on public land because no such total is kept. Search is a word that hides a great deal. So here is what one actually consists of on this ground. When somebody vanishes in a national park, an organization with a mandate for visitor safety responds to it. There is an incident command structure that gets stood up the same way every time. There are ranger staff whose entire training is finding people in that specific park. There is an investigative branch with federal authority. There is a public information officer whose job is putting a photograph in front of the country. When somebody vanishes in a national forest, a county sheriff responds to it. That sheriff may have 15 deputies. He may have a search and rescue unit that is entirely volunteer, staffed by people who left their jobs that morning to come out. He probably has one helicopter available, and it probably belongs to somebody else, a state police wing or a rancher or the National Guard, and it flies when the weather allows and when the funding allows and when it is not already committed somewhere else. He is running a search on federal ground he does not administer, using a map produced by an agency he does not work for, coordinating with Forest Service law enforcement officers who can assist, but whose job that day is not his case. And he has the rest of the county to police while he does it. Now stack the terrain on top of that. Coconino National Forest is nearly 2 million acres. Tonto is nearly 3 million. Rogue River Siskiyou is nearly 1.8 million. Gifford Pinchot is 1.3 million. Willamette is 1.6 million. Deschutes is 1.6 million. Kaibab is 1.5 million. Add those 7 together, and you get more than 12 million acres, and that is not even all the forests in tonight's episode. 12 million acres is larger than Switzerland. That is what a rural sheriff's office is asked to search, and the honest answer is that nobody searches it. What actually happens is that a small number of people search the small number of places where probability says a person is likely to be. For as long as weather and money and volunteer goodwill hold out, which is usually somewhere between 4 days and 3 weeks. And then it stops. Not because anybody gave up, because the resource ran out. And when it stops, the case does not transfer anywhere. There is no federal desk it lands on. There is no national queue it enters. It stays in a filing cabinet in a rural county where it will be reviewed when somebody has time, which in a 15-deputy office is a phrase without much meaning. That is the moment where these people actually disappear, not on the mountain. 3 weeks later, in an office. And there is a second thing that the word search hides, and it is the part families never expect. The first question is not where. The first question is when. A search is built out of a last known position and an elapsed time, and those two numbers generate a circle, and everything else follows from the circle. Every hour of elapsed time expands the radius. Every hour of elapsed time also degrades what is inside it, because scent thins and tracks fill and weather moves through. In a national park, elapsed time is usually short because a park is a place where somebody notices. On the rest of the federal estate, elapsed time is whatever it is. Judith Casita's truck sat at that ramp for 19 days before anybody looked at it. 19 days is not a search. 19 days is an archaeology problem. David Barclay Miller's Subaru was found days after he walked away from it. And the reason anybody went looking at all is that he had a job to come back to. If he had been a tourist instead of a ranger, the car might have sat at the Bear Sign trailhead for a week before anyone connected it to a missing person report filed in another state. Justin Richardson was reported 2 days after the last date some sources give for him being seen. 2 days for a 13-year-old. Dustin Self's truck was not found for a month, and he had already been out of contact for a month before that. 7 of the people in this episode have no publicly recoverable elapsed time at all because they have no publicly recoverable last known position. Just a date on a list, and the date on a list is the date somebody was reported, not the date somebody stopped being somewhere. So when you hear that searchers found nothing, understand what they were actually working with. Not a fresh scene. A location where a person may have been at some point during a window that might be hours wide or might be weeks wide. On ground the size of a small European country, with volunteers and 1 helicopter. There is one more consequence of that, and families feel it before anyone else does. A missing person case that stays inside one rural county, stays inside one rural county's imagination. There is no national photograph. There is no wire story. There is nobody in the next state who might have seen something and might connect it, because nobody in the next state has ever heard the name. The reason you know the names of the famous park disappearances is that the park system generated a press release, The reason you will not have heard the 7 names still to come in this episode is that nobody generated anything. The wonder is not that these people were not found. The wonder is that anybody ever is. Coconino County has been waiting to come back into this because of what its own paperwork does to the shape of everything else. The Coconino County Sheriff's Office publishes its own cold case list, not a national database, a county document, in a county that contains parts of the Grand Canyon, most of the Coconino National Forest, and a large piece of the Kaibab. Go down that list and it stops being about missing hikers. Unidentified male skeletal remains found by ranchers off a forest road near Ash Fork in 1995. Manner of death undetermined. Unidentified male skeletal remains found by a Forest Service ranger in May of 1996, northeast of the interstate near Williams. An unidentified female found in October of 2003 just off Devil Dog Road near Williams. A woman named Elizabeth Matthews, last seen in February of 1998, whose husband told investigators she had gone for a walk at the base of Mount Eldon, and who has not been seen since. Those are 4 separate entries in one county. 3 of them are people whose names nobody knows, found on or beside national forest ground, by ranchers and by a ranger, with the manner of death listed as undetermined. Now the 2 halves of the problem meet. On one side, there are people who are missing and were last seen on federal land, and nothing anywhere records the federal land. On the other side, there are unidentified remains found on federal land, and until the Trace Act passes, there is no field that records that either. The bill covers both. Whether the missing person's last known location was federal land, and whether unidentified remains were located on federal land. Which means that right now, in the United States, there is a man missing from a national forest in one state, and a set of unidentified bones found in a national forest in another state, and the 2 records sit in the same national database with no way to ask the system whether it has ever seen that combination before. You can search that database by height, by dental records, by tattoos, by the year, by the state. You can't search it by the only thing those 2 people have in common. Justin Richardson is one of those files. His county says they believe he was a homicide victim. His entry in the databases says missing in a national forest. Somewhere out there, if his county is right, there is either a set of remains that has never been connected to a name, or there is ground that has never been walked. David Barkley Miller is one of those files. A wilderness ranger, 28 years gone, in a wilderness area 100 miles from where an unidentified man was found by another Forest Service ranger in 1996. Those 2 are almost certainly nothing to do with each other. The point is that there is no way for anyone to check, not a detective, not a coroner, not a family with 28 years and nothing else to do. The question can't be asked because the database has no word for the thing being asked about. One category of federal land has not come up yet, and it is the one that will bother you most. The bill does not only cover forests and deserts, it covers the territorial waters of the United States. That is written into the text. Confirmed or suspected to have been on federal land or in the territorial waters of the United States. Somebody drafting that legislation looked at the problem and concluded that the ocean off the American coast has the same gap in it as the Cascades do. Nobody counts there either. And most people picture a national forest wrong because they picture a park with more trees. A park is a destination, an entrance, a gate, a fee, a visitor center, a map somebody hands you, marked trails, a road system built to keep people on it. A national forest is a working landscape. There are logging roads on it, and grazing allotments, and mining claims, and cell towers, and private inholdings, and hunting camps, and dispersed camping with no registration of any kind. You can drive onto most of it without passing anything that records that you did. There is no gate. There is no count of who went in. There is frequently no count of who came out. That is not a scandal. That is the design. Americans have access to 193 million acres of forest precisely because nobody stands at the edge of it writing down names, and most people would not trade that. But it means that when somebody does not come back, the first question in the investigation is one that a park never has to ask. Was anyone expecting him? If the answer is no, the clock does not start. David Barclay Miller left a note at a ranger station, and his car was found days later. Justin Richardson was reported by his father 2 days after he was last seen, and the county's own record says he was last seen on a different day, in a different place, from what every other source says. 7 of the 14 people in this episode have no publicly recoverable start time at all, just a date on a list, and that is the number the Trace Act is actually about, not 1600. 0. The number of these people who are recorded anywhere as having disappeared on federal land is 0, because the place to record it does not exist. Everything up to this point has come from newspapers, sheriff's statements, county cold case documents, and national databases. Those 7 files have paper behind them, or most of them do. You already heard what Coconino County has on Sean Rents. The next 7 have nothing at all. Listen to what happens to the texture of this episode now, because the change is the argument. Sanford David Rice, Mount Jefferson Wilderness, Oregon, the 23rd of June, 2016. That is it. That is the record. A name. A place. A day. Somewhere there is a family that knows what he looked like that morning. Mount Jefferson Wilderness sits in the Cascades between Bend and Salem. It is about 111,000 acres of the Willamette and Deschutes National Forests, built around a 10,000-foot volcano with glaciers on it. There are lakes up there in the hundreds. There are old burns where the standing dead timber has come down across itself in layers that a person can't walk through, only climb over. A man went into it on a Thursday in June and did not come out. Somebody reported him. Somebody searched. Somebody made phone calls to a family. All of that happened because it always happens. None of it is anywhere you can reach. And that is not because somebody sealed it. It is because a case file in a county office is a physical and administrative object that exists in one place, and the only way it becomes visible to the rest of the country is if a human being chooses to retype it into a national system. And in most of this country, that choice is optional. I can't tell you his age with confidence. I can't tell you what he was wearing, what he was carrying, which trailhead he used, whether his car was found, how long the search ran, or who ran it. Not because those things do not exist somewhere. Somewhere there is a Marion County or Jefferson County or Lynn County file with all of it in it. Because there is no place where that file connects to the fact that he was on federal land, there is no way for you or me or a deputy in another county to find it. Riley Zickel, Mount Jefferson Wilderness, Oregon, the 28th of July, 2016. Same wilderness. 35 days later. 2 people disappeared inside the same 111,000 acres of national forest in the same summer, 5 weeks apart. And if you go looking for the connection between those 2 names in any government system, there is nothing to find. Not because investigators dismissed it, because there is no field that would put them on the same screen. 2 people is not a pattern, and it would be dishonest to dress it as one. That wilderness receives tens of thousands of visitors in a Cascade summer. 2 bad outcomes across 5 weeks in a landscape of glaciers, snowfields, lakes, and blowdown is arithmetic before it is anything else. The point is not that it is impossible. The point is that nobody in any office in the United States knows it happened. If it happened in a national park, both cases would be on one page with a photograph and a case number. It happened in a wilderness area administered by the Forest Service. Michael Dean Voss, Rogue River, Siskiyou National Forest, Oregon, the 10th of October, 2019. Rogue River Siskiyou runs down the Oregon and California line, nearly 1.8 million acres. The Siskiyous are some of the most botanically complex and physically confusing mountains in North America. A place where ridges do not run in parallel and drainages double back on themselves. October is when the weather turns there. The rain arrives off the Pacific and the fog sits in the drainages for weeks, and aircraft become decorative. That is the terrain. About Michael Dean Voss there is a name, a forest, and a date. He had a life. He had people. He had a reason to be out there on the 10th of October, and somebody knows what it was. It is not written down anywhere the public can reach, and it is not written down anywhere a deputy in the next county can reach either. Stephen Van Pelt, Willamette National Forest, Oregon, the 2nd of July, 2021. Lester Young Whitmire, Deschutes, Oregon, the 23rd of July, 2021. 3 weeks apart, in the same summer, in adjacent national forests on opposite flanks of the same range. Willamette is 1.6 million acres. Deschutes is 1.6 million more. Between them, they cover the spine of the Oregon Cascades, and the boundary between them runs along the crest, which means 2 men disappeared in July of the same year on 2 sides of the same ridge. Or they did not, and the dates and the forests on a volunteers list are the only 2 facts in existence, and this is a mountain range being read into a spreadsheet. That is exactly the problem. Nobody can tell which. Not me, not you, not the sheriff. If you want to know how much of the missing 411 phenomenon is real, and how much is people finding shapes and noise, this is the honest answer. Nobody can run that test. The data required to run it has never been collected. Maureen Kelly, Gifford Pinchot, National Forest, Washington. The 9th of June, 2013. Gifford Pinchot is 1 1/3 million acres on the west side of the Cascades in southern Washington. It contains Mount St. Helens. It contains the Big Lava Bed, which is a hardened flow that swallowed 46 square miles and grew a forest on top of itself, and which has no reliable landmarks, no water, and rock that eats compasses because of the iron in it. Paul Victor Tomaso, Tonto National Forest, Arizona. The 13th of February, 2014. Tonto is nearly 3 million acres wrapped around Phoenix. It contains the Superstition Wilderness, which has a body count going back a century, and the Mazatzal and the Sierra Ancha. 4.5 million people live within an hour and a half of its boundary. February in the Sonoran Desert is the pleasant month. It is when everybody goes out there, trailheads full, cars parked along the shoulders, hundreds of people on the ground on any given weekend. Which means whatever happened to Paul Victor Tomaso on the 13th of February happened in a busy landscape. A name, a forest, a date, 7 people, 7 names, 7 dates, in a row, so you hear how little is there. Sanford David Rice, Riley Zickel, Michael Dean Voss, Stephen Van Pelt, Lester Young Whitmire, Maureen Kelly, Paul Victor Tomaso. No ages you can rely on, no photographs in the public record, no description of what any of them was wearing, no vehicle, no trailhead, no last conversation, no search duration, no agency contact number for a tip. If one of them walked past you tomorrow, you would not know. If a hunter found remains next season in the Willamette, there is no page anybody would think to check. That is not a mystery in the entertaining sense. That is a filing failure with people inside it. That is the whole of what a member of the public can learn about 7 human beings who disappeared on land owned by the United States government. The lazy move here is to tell you somebody is hiding something. I won't, because there is a simpler explanation and it is worse. Nobody is hiding these files. Nobody assembled them in the first place. A sheriff's office in a rural county opens a case. It is their case, in their filing system, in their county. The Forest Service has law enforcement officers, and they can provide search and rescue resources and investigative assistance, but the missing person case belongs to the county, and the county has 15 deputies and 10,000 square miles. If nobody enters it into the national database, it does not exist nationally, and entering it is optional. 17 states require law enforcement to enter cases into that database, 17 out of 50. In the other 33, a deputy types it in if a deputy types it in. After the phone calls, and the ground search, and the press release, and the family, and the 12 other cases on the desk. And nobody is being negligent in that sentence. A rural sheriff's office running a wilderness search with volunteers and 1 helicopter is doing something extraordinarily hard with almost nothing. The data entry is the last thing on a list that never ends, which is precisely why the field has to exist. Systems catch what people are too tired to catch. So those 7 names exist in public because volunteers built a list. Private citizens, on their own time, going through news archives and county records, assembling the roster the United States does not keep. There is a website called Missing NPF. Its own description of itself is that it is America's first and most comprehensive national park missing persons database. America's first. The country has had a national park service since 1916. It has had a forest service since 1905. The first comprehensive list of people missing on that ground was made by private individuals with a web host. And here is the detail that will outlast every disappearance in this episode. The national database can already do this. In order to address missing and murdered American Indian and Alaska Native cases, they added new data fields. For missing person cases, the fields ask whether the missing person was last seen on tribal land under the jurisdiction of the United States, and whether the missing person's primary residence was on tribal land. For unidentified remains, the field asks whether the person was found deceased on tribal land under the jurisdiction of the United States. The field exists. It was built. It works. It is answered as part of completing a case submission, with options to indicate when the information is unknown. For tribal land. That comparison needs to be exact, because it is not an accusation against anyone. Those tribal fields were added for a reason, and the reason is that indigenous people go missing at rates that the existing records were failing to capture, and families and advocates spent years forcing that failure into view until somebody built the field, which proves the thing can be done. The database can be modified. Somebody wrote the code. Somebody deployed it. For the rest of the federal estate, there is no such question. And the bill that would add one has now passed the United States Senate twice without becoming law. The first time, in September of 2024, the Senate passed it unanimously, and it died. The second time, in September of 2025, the Senate passed it again and sent it to the House of Representatives. It is called the TRACE Act, and the acronym stands for Tracking and Reporting Absent Community Members Everywhere. What it does, in full, is add a data field indicating whether a missing person's last known location was confirmed or suspected to be on federal land, including specific location details about which unit of federal land, and the same for unidentified remains found on federal land. Then it requires the Attorney General to send Congress a report every year with the number of such cases. That is the entire bill. 6 pages, not a budget, not a new agency, not a mandate on any sheriff. 6 pages that add a checkbox and require somebody to count what the checkbox catches. 2 unanimous Senate votes. Still not law. Back to the exit ramp because the missing field has a price and it is measurable in one case. February 2006, Judith Casita leaves Reno. Washoe County takes the report because Reno is in Washoe County. Her note makes it an adult who left voluntarily. 19 days later, her truck is found 200 miles away at exit 205. That land around the ramp is not city and not private ranch. It is the Great Basin, and out there, the checkerboard of Bureau of Land Management ground runs for 100 miles in every direction. Washoe County searches. Nothing. The case stays a Washoe County case. April 2011. Patrick Carnes is stopped near Wells by a state trooper. Wells is in Elko County. He tells the trooper he is following a trucker headed to Elko. He buys gas. He drives 150 miles west through the night. At 6 the next morning, his car is found at exit 205. That is Humboldt County. Humboldt County takes the case, so the file for the last confirmed sighting sits with one agency, and the file for the abandoned vehicle sits with another, and the file for the woman whose truck was found in the same field 5 years earlier sits with a third, 200 miles away. 3 agencies, 1 patch of desert, and no agency did anything wrong. Washoe took the report because the woman lived there. Humboldt took the vehicle because the vehicle was there. That is how jurisdiction works, and it is the only way it can work. The thing that would have connected them is a line in a form, and you have to be honest about what that line would and would not have done. It would not have found Judith Casita in 2006. It would not have stopped whatever happened to Patrick Carnes in 2011. What it would have done is make the coincidence visible on the day it mattered, instead of years later on a hobbyist's map. It would have meant that when a deputy in Winnemucca stood at that ramp looking at a green Subaru facing the wrong way in the sagebrush, a screen somewhere could have told him this is the second one. 600 to 700 man-hours went into that search. Cameras down mine shafts, aircraft, dogs. None of it was aimed by the knowledge that it had happened there before. Search planning is arithmetic done under pressure. Where would this person go? How far could he move? What is downhill? What is water? What is a road? What does a confused person do? Every one of those questions gets an answer, and the answer sends people somewhere. Add one input and every answer changes. If a deputy knows that 5 years earlier another vehicle was found empty in the same field and that person was never located, the search stops being a lost elderly man and starts being something else entirely on day one, while there is still ground to read. That input existed. It was in a filing cabinet 200 miles away. And that is the part that will not settle across every one of these files. 2 men in the same 2 million acres of Coconino, 14 years apart, and one of them was a Forest Service ranger. 2 people in the same 111,000 acres of Mount Jefferson wilderness, 5 weeks apart, in the same summer. 2 vehicles in the same field at the same exit ramp, 5 years apart. Not one of those pairs is connected in any government system anywhere. All 3 of them were noticed by private people looking at lists. There is an obvious thing to do with a pattern like that, and this video is not going to do it. Here is what the record contains. How much of it is arithmetic is yours to decide. The arithmetic is real. Millions of people use these forests. Some of them are going to die out there and never be found, because falling into a canyon in the Siskiyous or going into the water in the Cascades needs no explanation beyond gravity and cold. 2 disappearances in one wilderness area in one summer is not an unlikely event across that much ground and that many visitors. That is true, and it accounts for most of it. What it does not account for is a 100-pound dog and 1 set of footprints. It does not account for a woman leaving a shale slope in silence with a man standing a short distance away. It does not account for a 13-year-old whose own county can't agree on which day he was last seen or which piece of federal land he was on, and whose sheriff's officials now say they think he was murdered. It does not account for a wilderness ranger with 1 month in the job walking into an area he was paid to know, leaving a note saying exactly where he was going and producing not one recoverable object in 28 years. And nothing accounts for the fact that if you wanted to check whether any of those things had ever happened in that place before, there is nowhere in the United States government where you could look. That is where the other versions come from, by the way. Not from evidence, from vacuum. Nature does not tolerate an empty file. Neither do people. When a family can't get an answer and can't even get a count, they will eventually go looking for one anywhere it might be. And the internet has plenty of answers ready. Some are about the woods themselves. Some are about what lives in them. Some are about what the government supposedly knows and will not say. There is no evidence for any of that in these 14 files. Not a fragment. But a country that can't say how many of its citizens have vanished on its own land has no standing to be surprised when people fill in the blank themselves. Let me be exact about what is not being claimed here. Because in this corner of the internet, the difference matters. Nobody in this video was taken by anything. Nothing is being alleged about where any of them went. 1600 is not a count of people who disappeared on public land. It is a count of the ones who happened to get counted by somebody. Once you notice that the list does not exist, you start noticing who made the list that does. Everything in this episode about Sanford David Rice and Riley Zickel and Michael Dean Voss came from a register compiled by people who are not paid to compile it. Volunteers going through local newspaper archives, county sheriff's postings, coroner's notices, and family social media, entering the results into a spreadsheet, publishing it, keeping it current, for free, for years. That register is the reason those 7 names could be said out loud tonight at all. The inversion is total. The government owns the land. The government runs the agencies. The government holds the case files, the coordinates, the search logs, the radio traffic, and the coroner's reports on every person who has ever walked into a national forest and not walked out. And the only place a member of the public can see them in one column is a website somebody built in their spare time. The people who do this are not conspiracy theorists. Most of them started because somebody they knew went missing, or because they read one case that would not leave them alone. They fact-check each other. They correct entries. They take a name down when a person is found and put a date beside it. They are doing, without funding, the exact thing a 6-page bill has been trying and failing to make the federal government do for 2 years. And they hit the same wall from below. No case numbers, no search logs, No coroner's findings that were never published. For most entries, the local newspaper archive is the only witness, and small-town newspapers have been closing for 20 years. So the register is thinnest exactly where it needs to be thickest. The newest cases in the emptiest counties, in the states with the least local news left. That is the direction this is heading. Not toward more information, toward less. And those volunteers are the reason anybody ever noticed the two vehicles in that field. Not a fusion center, not an analyst, somebody with a map and enough attention span to see a coordinate twice. The families do the rest of it themselves. Pat Carnes' sons put flyers up at truck stops along 300 miles of interstate. Dustin Self's parents tried to stop him leaving and then spent a year on a mountain. David Barclay Miller's mother and father are named in every account of his case because they never stopped. Barbara Bullock's husband has been waiting 18 years. The thing that would help every one of them has passed the United States Senate twice and is shorter than a lease agreement. As of this recording, it has not become law. There is a piece of arithmetic in the middle of all this that has been sitting unsaid. The Senate's own material puts the floor at 1,600. The National Park Service reported that in a single recent year, more than 2,200 people were the subject of search and rescue incidents in national parks alone. Most were found, some within minutes. The parks are a small fraction of the whole. The Forest Service manages roughly 193 million acres. The Bureau of Land Management manages roughly 245 million. So the agency that keeps the best records and publishes a cold case list is responsible for the smallest share of the ground, and the two agencies responsible for the overwhelming majority of it publish nothing comparable at all. Which means the 1,600 is not an estimate of the problem. It is an estimate of the visible part of the problem, made by counting the part that gets counted. There is no honest way to know what the real number is. That is not evasion. That is the finding. One more piece of it, unsaid until now. Even inside the parks, where the record is best, the record is not good. Yosemite's list of missing persons has at least 33 names on it, and it has not been comprehensively updated since 2017. 10 of the 25 cold cases held by the Park Service investigative branch are in that one park. The Great Smoky Mountains has more than 1,600 documented missing persons reports in its history, which is, on its own, the same as the national estimate for all federal land combined. The Grand Canyon has at least 56 people reported missing since 2018. So here is the one opinion in this whole video. The reason these cases feel like something more than accidents is not that they are something more than accidents. It is that a country capable of tracking a package across an ocean in real time can't tell you how many of its citizens are lying somewhere in its own forests. Absence of information feels like concealment. It almost never is, but it produces exactly the same sensation, and it produces it in the people least able to bear it, which is the families. When Ken Carnes said the search for his father was stuck in neutral, not going forward and not going backward, he was describing a thing that had no villain in it. Everybody did their job. The highway patrol wrote the stop. The mine worker made the call. Humboldt County put 700 hours into the desert and lowered cameras into mine shafts. And at the end of all of it, there was still no place on Earth where the words Pumpernickel Valley and missing person had ever appeared together in a form. There is one more document, deliberately kept out of the count, because it is not a disappearance. It is a measurement. In 2022, a member of Congress asked the Interior Department for its records on missing persons in the national parks. What came back was about 60 pages covering roughly 1,100 missing person reports going back to 2018. The data was inconsistent in the level of detail from park to park, and incomplete, and the agency said privacy regulations prevented it from releasing more than what it sent. As a ratio, that is 60 pages for 1,100 human beings. That is a line and a half each. That is the National Park Service, which is the good one. That is the agency with the investigative branch and the published cold case list and the public information officers. Now consider that no equivalent request to the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management would produce anything comparable, because those agencies are not organized around visitors at all. They are organized around timber, grazing, minerals, fire, and recreation infrastructure. A person is not a category in that structure until a person becomes a fatality, and even then the fatality belongs to a county coroner. Go looking for the number of people currently missing on the 193 million acres of national forest in the United States. There is no such number. Not a classified number. Not a withheld number. There is no number because nobody is in a position to produce one. The best that exists is a volunteer's spreadsheet and a Senate estimate its own authors refuse to stand behind. Once you know that, a lot of the strangeness in these files stops being about the woods. 2 vehicles at that ramp, 5 years apart, in the same field, both drivers from Reno, both never found. That is either an extraordinary coincidence or it is not, and the reason nobody can tell you which is not that the answer is hidden. It is that the question has never been asked by anything capable of answering it. 2 men lost in Coconino National Forest 14 years apart. 2 people lost in Mount Jefferson Wilderness 5 weeks apart. 2 men lost in adjacent Oregon forests 3 weeks apart in the same July. Every one of those pairs was noticed by an amateur. Judith Cassida's truck sat at that ramp for 19 days before a human being looked at it. Patrick Carnes's car was seen by a mine worker driving to a shift at 6 in the morning because a mine worker happened to turn his head. Dustin Self's truck was found by a ranch foreman. Dustin Self's body was found by a hunter a year and a half later. The 2 friends Justin Richardson went back into the forest to look for were found by railway employees. Every single time, the thing that broke the silence was a private person who happened to be looking in the right direction on the right afternoon. Never a system. Because there is no system. 14 people tonight. 7 of them have a paper trail. 7 of them have a name and a date on a list of volunteer typed into a spreadsheet at their kitchen table. All 14 disappeared on land owned by the government of the United States. Not one of them is recorded anywhere as having done so. The Senate has now said, twice, unanimously, that this needs fixing. The fix is 6 pages and adds a checkbox to a form that already exists. A country voted twice in a single chamber to start counting its own missing, and still has not managed it. So the count stands where it stood at the beginning of this video. At least 1,600 people on 640 million acres, and the people who produced that number will tell you to your face that it is far too low. Which means nobody can tell you whether there is a pattern out there. Not the sheriffs, not the Park Service, not the FBI, not the people who write the books about it, and not me. Nobody has the data because nobody collects it, and you can't find a pattern in a thing nobody is counting. That is the actual horror in these 14 files, and it is not in the woods. It is that the exit ramp took 2 people in 5 years, and if it takes a third tonight, there will be no alarm anywhere. No flag on a screen, no analyst, no match. Someone driving to a shift at a mine will see a car parked where a car should not be, and they will either make the call or they won't. That is the entire early warning system the United States has for a quarter of its own territory.